Certainly, fans are going to engage in that same exercise with a number of transactions. Probably most prominently, sale for Grissom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
How do you, going back, how do you view both the framework that you were operating from, where you were looking to take a player who was under team control for one more year, who'd been injury prone, but obviously incredibly talented, in trading for a longer term asset last offseason?
Yeah, I think the framework at the time was sound for the reasons that you just laid out. That was a decision that was made, with the longer term focus in mind, as much as 2024. And it absolutely hurts that Chris Sale was not pitching the way that he had all season in a Red Sox uniform this year, and it's really easy to kind of play the what if game. I think we have to evaluate the process, evaluate the information that led us to the decision that it did, and then also recognize we are now in a different moment in time. And exclusively looking at the future is not something that we should be prepared to do as we embark on this offseason heading into 2025. Otherwise, I think fans would be, rightfully frustrated with this continue to push off into the future, the window of contention. I think instead we can no longer ask our fans to look to the future, to think about a Red Sox team that's capable of winning the division and capable of making a deep postseason run. I think instead we have to talk to decisive actions that we're taking right now to put a better team on the field in 2025.
Yeah, that was. I appreciate the framing of that, because I was curious. You had obviously discussed last January that idea of not wanting to sacrifice long-term wins for short-term. It sounds like that's changed.
Yeah, and I think the reason you build a strong foundation is so that you can bring the focus closer, so that you aren't talking about farm systems and top prospects. You're talking about wins on the field. That's what our fans deserve. That's why we do this. And so I think we do have a strong foundation in place, from the contributing members of our major league team to the position player group that everybody gets excited about, to changes in the front office and changes in our infrastructure, so that when we have to make trades that hurt in order to better our current major league team, we know that there's a wave of talent behind those guys.
When you go into the offseason, now that you will have a full offseason as chief baseball officer, and Sam Kennedy was asked in the press conference about payroll. He said, we're not going to give away what our plans are on that front. But is that something that's defined in advance? Is there a budget that you have to operate within, or is it a case of we've identified this player, is that player worth it, where does it fit in? So take us through a little bit of that process without giving away the details.
Or give away the details.
Or give away the details if you want.
Okay, so no. Every conversation that I've had with John or Tom or Sam or Mike has revolved around they're wanting to be presented with opportunities to make this team better. And so as those opportunities are unearthed, and we'll be as aggressive as we can possibly be in surfacing those opportunities, we take them to ownership. And I give my recommendation from the baseball perspective as to whether or not I think this is a move that we should make, and they are always willing to listen. So again, not sparing details about budget and what does or doesn't exist. I have never heard anything other than, when there is a chance to make this organization better, bring it to us.
And so now that you go into a period where maybe you are looking at more short-term games, more about winning games in 2025, is there a difference in those conversations from last year, when maybe it was a little more of a long-term vision, that things still needed to be fixed on the foundational side, to compared to those conversations now?
Yeah, I think there's a constant calibration, right? I don't think an off season should ever be exclusively focused on either of those things, especially not here. We have a responsibility to the fan base to bring this team back to relevance, to bring this team back to the standard that has come to be expected over the last 20 years, given the success that the franchise has had. And so while my job is to try to keep some eye on the short and long term, I think we calibrate that more toward the present. And I think one of the reasons that Alex and I have a really productive relationship is that we both respect and appreciate that we should take a view of this, or an account of this, through slightly different lenses. Like, his job should be to focus exclusively on the game tonight, the season in front of us. Whereas I'm trying to balance those a little bit, but to say that we've kind of shifted the dial toward the present at the expense of the future, I think would be a fair characterization.
In terms of figuring out, in terms of shifting towards the present, you guys have some really interesting prospects in AAA, right?
We do.
There's a big, I guess you probably are going to let the rest of the offseason dictate whether or not you would consider the ultimate decision about like a Roman Anthony or a Christian Campbell in the big leagues. But as we sit here, do you view them as options for the big leagues that will inform the decisions that you'll make over the rest of the offseason rounding out the roster?
Yeah, I mean, I think we have to view them as options. Now, exactly what that means will be dictated by a series of moves, including their off seasons and their growth. And so there are certain guys that I think are talented enough that they kind of dictate their timelines. And my hope is we have a handful of those guys, in the upper levels of our minor leagues. Now, that I think we have all come to learn that there is little, if any, certainty around prospects. But I do think we have a really special group that's going to impact this organization in the near future. But exactly what that looks like will, at least in part, be dictated by other opportunities.
Yeah, it's super interesting, right? You experienced it with Bogarts and the 2014 season when Mookie and Jackie, right? Like those were your teammates, and they fell on their faces.
I was going to say, right?
Yeah.
Only a handful of guys come up and immediately impact a team, right? And and so we have to be prepared whenever it is that young guys come up, that it might not be a honeymoon, from the time that they debut, and that's okay. I think we're going to be in a place where there is enough talent around the diamond that the expectations aren't going to fall squarely on the shoulders of a Roman Anthony or a Marcelo Meyer, Christian Campbell, or Kyle Teal.
At the trade deadline, you traded away prospect capital to get guys to help, as we discussed. Do you anticipate that being a way you address some of the needs of this team in the coming year? You have built up now one of the deeper farm systems in baseball. Do you anticipate using some of that to make trades to bring in talent?
Yeah, I think we at least have to be open to it. I don't think we're going to find ourselves in a position where we have to make a trade for the sake of making a trade. We would make a trade to address, a deficiency or a void or an opportunity to improve somewhere else. But there are certain positional constraints and realities that we have to face, namely that like only 8 position players can be out there at a time. So there are going to be a lot of really good major league players who aren't going to realize their value in Red Sox uniforms because only one guy can do that at a time at second base or shortstop or center field.
And when you talk about free agents, some of them are already here, right? And a lot of people talked about Tyler O'Neill. I know that you said you made it a point to try to talk to all your pending free agents. But with O'Neill specifically, where one would look at your team and say, there's a need for right-handed power. Probably say that about any team in Major League Baseball, but a guy who has shown that he can thrive here and use the dimensions of Fenway. What was that conversation like, and what is the level of mutual interest early in this offseason?
Yeah, it was a great conversation. He was, he was appreciative and grateful of the opportunity here, the experience here. He spoke, rather glowingly about the medical staff and the support staff, which was great. We want to support our players, as much as we can, as holistically as we can. And so getting that feedback from someone who had spent time elsewhere was certainly a positive reinforcement of what we're trying to do. And from my end, like I said, I'm not hiding from the fact that, guys who hit 30 home runs and are right-handed, like they have a place at Fenway Park. Now, we've got to, have conversations around whether or not there's overlap in terms of what he's looking for, what we're looking for, and those conversations I'm sure will take place in the coming months.